Hey everyone! Welcome to our channel, where truth meets entertainment. If you love celebrity stories, untold secrets, and jaw-dropping twists, you're in the right place. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell so you never miss an update. He continued, he would not give up, and he did not give up. Pastor Charles Stanley's family finally talked about his final days. This isn't good. Charles Stanley was covertly dealing with family conflict at home, despite spending 50 years lecturing about the value of family. When his wife filed for divorce and his son left the church, his daughter did nothing, and he watched helplessly as everything fell apart. They were able to communicate after his death in 2023. You'll be shocked by what they told you about his last days. He changed from the person he was at home to the man he seemed to be in church with the final 3 words he said to his child. On September 25, 1932, Charles Stanley was born in Dry Fork, Virginia. Many people were hungry, jobless, and unsure of whether they should even attempt to live during the worst of the Great Depression. His parents, Charles Stanley and Rebecca Hall, were having financial difficulties. Red lines extended for blocks, and homes were lost overnight. Even though it was a terrible time to be a kid, one of the most significant individuals in Christian ministry came out of hardship. Everything changed 9 months after Charles was born. His father died suddenly when he was just 29 years old. One minute he was gone, the next he was back. There was no farewell or remembering, only a name and stillness. During the worst economic downturn in American history, his mother, Rebecca, was left to raise a newborn by herself. Past occurrences. Charles worried about slipping behind all the time. He grew up with a hole in his heart, and he often pondered who his father was and what kind of man he would have been if he had sought his advice. He would characterize God as the Father who is ever present, never forgets, and never turns away because of this unquenchable desire. Rebecca got married again when she was 9 years old. Charles was 9 years old. She foolishly thought that by adopting a fatherly role for her son, she was doing the right thing. However, they were almost condemned to fail because of this choice. She wed John Hall, a violently angry alcoholic. Almost at once the horror started. Rebecca learned that her marriage had been a lie 2 weeks after the ceremony. Hall's family had lied to her. He was obviously vicious. They promised her that he would change once he got married. The man wasn't. Charles was also naturally afraid of the unknown. He saw his mother being strangled by his father. He had developed the practice of locking his bedroom door at night. Sometimes he even slept with a weapon loaded beside him. He spent his childhood in a conflict zone. More than just a wound, what happened to him strengthened him. It demonstrated to him that faith is necessary for survival and that the only way to guarantee one's survival is to trust God, not other people. Charles went to church as a way to escape the chaos at home. He came from a Pentecostal family. His grandfather, George Washington Stanley, played a key role in the founding of the Emmanuel Pentecostal Holiness Church in Dry Fork. Growing up in a Pentecostal home, Charles loved the fervent preaching, raucous prayers, and powerful feelings that accompanied Pentecostal worship. He would take sanctuary in the church basement whenever things at home became too unbearable. He cried, yelled, and prayed out loud, pleading with God for peace. He developed the habit of saying a sincere prayer instead of a silent one. His Pentecostal zeal persisted even after he became a Baptist. He thus started speaking, teaching, and leading in new ways. At the age of 17, my life drastically changed. Charles traveled to Siler City, North Carolina, to see his grandfather. He reconsidered his decision to become a teacher. He had fractures, was too young, and was weak. His grandfather cautioned him, "Charles, if God tells you to put your head through that brick wall, you run for it." He would follow a single line throughout his life. He is responsible for digging the hole. This became more than a catchphrase, it became a way of life. Charles says, that moment hit him like a ton of bricks. After that, he became sure of one thing: follow God and let Him handle the rest. Loyalty kept him afloat when life didn't make sense. Before moving to Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in Fort Worth, Texas, Charles started his formal study in the 1950s at the University of Richmond. There were a lot of Bible schools at this time. After 1945, the number had tripled. Charles threw himself into studying Greek, Hebrew, theology, and preaching at a time when church groups were finding new means to connect via radio and television. Not only was he learning about the Bible, but he was also learning how to make it relatable to the suffering of others. Charles began preaching at the young age of 25, and in 1957 he taught preaching at Fruitland Baptist Church in North Carolina. With only 150 members, the little church in a hilly village was exactly what he needed. He made $75 a week teaching evangelism and preaching at a local Bible institute while running a full-time church, but he didn't mind because he loved what he did. Many of his supporters were poor industrial workers or farmers who had to cope with hardship and uncertainty. He offered people hope rather than just preaching. In 1958, Charles was just 26 years old when he became a Baptist pastor. Charles was ready, even though many ministers received their licenses in their 30s. He had the ideal timing. Evangelism on television was at its peak. On all of them was Billy Graham. Charles would soon begin his own television ministry, following in Oral Roberts' footsteps. The document that gave him the power to marry, baptize, and lead churches was also published in that same year. The start of a new kind of mission that would benefit millions of people worldwide, however, was the most important event. Between 1959 and 1968, Charles moved to a number of different places, including Fairborn, Ohio, Miami, Florida, and Bartow, Florida. Charles led a church in Fairborn, Ohio, which was close to a large Air Force post that grew rapidly as a result of the Cold War. Every church faced different difficulties. His congregation grew from 400 to 800 members while he served as a minister in Miami during the Cuban Missile Crisis. He never stopped going forward, no matter how things were going. He became control of a smaller church in the sleepy 12,000-person community of Bartow in 1968. While most would have viewed it as a failure, Charles saw it as a chance to make a fresh start and build solid foundations. It was training, not failure, throughout that restless time. As he waited for the momentous occasion that would alter everything, he was improving his skills at work by learning from each town. He didn't know what type of conflict he was getting into when he initially got to Initially Baptist Atlanta in 1969. Stanley, who had no idea what he was getting himself into, entered a scenario where the church was split into factions that were fighting over politics and religion. Someone punched him at a particularly tense discussion, yet he stayed. He bore the strain, the gossip, the blatant hostility for 2 long and trying years. To decide whether Stanley should be named senior preacher, the church held an open vote on October 1, 1971. The gathering was tense and furious as the results were announced. Stanley rose to become the 16th leader of one of the most important Southern churches at the age of 39. But there was a price. When he introduced the Chapel Hour on 2 Atlanta TV stations, WXIA TV1 and WONK 46, the next year, he took an even greater chance. With 16,000 local viewers and a half-hour duration, the presentation was sufficiently noticeable to draw attention. Behind the scenes, Christian networks were looking for viewpoints that appeared realistic and believable, and Stanley's simple Bible teachings were just what they needed. The Christian Broadcasting Network made an effort to contact them in 1978 in order to get programming for their new satellite system. Yes, Stanley, it was. His fan base grew from 16,000 in Atlanta to fans nationwide in just 1 week. The show underwent a complete redesign and rebranding to In Touch with Dr. Charles Stanley. It was broadcast on television in almost all of the major cities in the United States by the early 1980s. This marked the beginning of its global spread. By the end, 150 countries had received Stan's message in 114 different languages. His television empire, however, began in classrooms rather than in front of cameras. Stanley founded the George Mueller Christian School in Miami in 1966, 5 years prior to his television fame. The school taught morals in addition to academic courses. It bears the name of George Mueller, a well-known Christian pastor who raised children using only faith and prayer. Stanley's belief that faith should permeate all element of life, especially in the care and education of children, is what gives the name its meaning. He took classes, started a school, pastored a church, and finished his graduate degree during this time. This showed the tenacity that would subsequently characterize his commitment to the country. He went to Bartow, Florida, in 1968 after leaving Miami. His thinking had expanded beyond Sunday conversations by 1969, when he was traveling to Atlanta. Those thoughts continued. There were roughly 5,000 members of First Baptist Atlanta when they took over. The church needed additional rooms since by the 1990s, that number had trebled. In 1997, Stanley made the unpopular choice to sell the historic facility in Midtown Atlanta and transfer the church to Dunwoody, a suburb. The new structure appeared sleek, contemporary, and future-ready, and it could accommodate 3,000 people. But numbers weren't all that intrigued Stanley. That was his plan. One of these was the Passion Play, a musical adaptation of Jesus' Final Week that had a sizable cast and staff and ran from 1977 to 2011. The church was transformed into a tool for outreach, media, and service under Stanley's direction. In 2020, he resigned after over 50 years. First Baptist Atlanta was a national institution, not just a church. The biggest change, though, might have happened in 1978 when his religion gained wings because to technology. The Chapel Hour had a significant impact that year when it was made in touch on CBN's satellite network. It rose quickly. In a week, Stanley's visage was broadcast on television stations all over the nation. In those days, it was unheard of for a priest to be visible in such a public place, but Stanley was unconcerned and welcomed the attention. He formally founded In Touch Ministries as a distinct nonprofit in 1982, giving him the flexibility to grow the organization however he saw fit. This also marked the beginning of his radio distribution, which eventually reached over 115 million homes in the United States. He didn't stop there, though. Using instruments that were essentially nobody else's business, he ventured to the most unreachable corners of the planet in pursuit of new ideas. Technology, in Stanley's opinion, was not only useful but also necessary. Even in towns without electricity, he wanted everyone to hear him. He developed the Messenger Lab line of 8 solar-powered audio devices for people without access to electricity, the internet, or a church. You could play the New Testament, Psalms, Proverbs, and 65 of his lectures in 2 languages on a single device. Over 1 million messaging devices were dispersed over time, and they were not stationary. In the name of advancing the gospel, Stanley gave 127 speeches during this time, had his lectures aired on more than 4,000 radio, television, and satellite stations, and was involved in digital media, podcasts, mobile apps, and other platforms. As the leader of the Southern Baptist Convention in 1984, at one of the most difficult times in the religion's history, Stanley was not only a well-known figure in the media but also a political hotspot. Stanley's victory in the 1984 to 1986 presidential election was due to the conservative resurgence that conservatives called the SBC's struggle over biblical inerrancy, the question of whether the Bible was true in every field, including science. In addition, he was the chairman of the Peace Committee that was formed in 1985 to halt the conflict. Following 15 lengthy meetings, the committee produced a 6,450-word report that backed up the claims made by Stanley and other conservatives. Stanley was present when the SBC changed its direction to become more religiously resolute. Charles Stanley engaged in combat in a Miami school in 1966, a church in 1971, and a satellite kingdom in the 1980s. Charles Stanley reached the zenith of his public life in February 1988. It was a big thing as he had just been inducted into the National Religious Broadcasters Hall of Fame. Over 115 million American homes were listening to his sermons, and Christian radio and television had made In Touch with Dr. Charles Stanley a mainstay. A visionary who had shaped the course of Christian media and served as the public face of a movement, he was not your typical speaker. On the home front, something much worse was taking place as the rest of the world celebrated his ascension. A year later, in 1989, Stanley went to Kansas City for a ministry meeting. As he prayed in his hotel room, he thought about Psalm 67 verse 2, "Send us all over the world to tell everyone about how powerful you are." He could see many satellite dishes on surrounding roofs as he looked out the window. He asserted that God had revealed to him right then and there that this was the best method for sharing the gospel all across the world. His lectures, which were later translated into 127 languages, were broadcast on more than 4,000 networks across the globe. But the man behind the message was collapsing as it spread. Anna, his wife, was starting to feel more and more alone. As he worked to broaden both his mission and his church, Charles spent more and more time away from both. She never put her desires ahead of his and always made her own decisions. She spoke in a cool, composed tone. She was in great pain as she talked. In the beginning of the 1990s, Anna ceased going to his religious events. Their son Andy, who went on to become a megachurch leader, was there at the ceremony. The increasing separation, the cold silence, the slow breakdown of a marriage that had lasted more than 40 years. In June 1993, she filed for divorce for the last time. All that was required to identify her was her first name, A.J. Stanley. According to the documents, their marriage could not be saved. As a result, some evangelical groups went crazy. Sunday sermons on the value of family values were delivered by Charles Stanley. By now, even his own marriage was falling apart in the public eye. People retaliated right away. Not everybody listened to him. A couple of people told him to leave the platform. The separation was not the only thing that shocked people. It centered on the charge that Stanley had failed at something that had been a fundamental aspect of his personality. The story did not, however, end right away. At one point, Anna withdrawn the petition because she wanted things to go better. When that failed in 1995, she reapplied. Everyone was observing the Stanleys, who were legally wed but emotionally apart for 7 years. It was an unhappy state of limbo. His speeches were taken verbatim from Christian radio. Some high-ranking church members had secretly advised him to retire. But week after week, he continued to preach. They were adamant and would not budge. Opposition from within the Southern Baptist Convention was intense. Once upon a time, Stanley had been its commander. He was being told to step down by them now. He had even told his church followers a long time ago that he would step down from ministry upon getting a divorce. Even though his marriage was in shambles, he continued to preach. Some of his employees even departed. Andy, as well as his son. On May 11, 2000, the split was formally terminated. After the court approved the case, no more arguments were permitted. Charles had been 67 years old. He was still unmarried at the time, even though his speeches were televised in 50 different languages. He had formerly been a fervent supporter of Christian family values, but now he had none. Until her passing in 2014, she was still unmarried. Charles never married again after that. According to church rules, he could continue to serve as a priest as long as he didn't marry. Shortly after the last documents were signed, he spoke before the assembly. The immense support he received from his church took him by surprise, but he calmly said, "God has told me I'm where He wants me to be and doing what He has called me to do." By a vote of 35-3, the board of elders decided to keep him on board. Stanley said something that shocked many later, "I never felt like I really even divorced her. I gave it to her when she asked for it." From a different perspective, that one sentence showed how much someone believed or disagreed with what they were saying. Some were skeptical, though. Long ago, Andy Stanley quietly and purposefully left First Baptist Atlanta. In addition to leaving the church, he also abandoned the succession plan that had been established for him. The scene. Rather, he took his own route and founded a church. In 1995, he founded the First North Point Community Church. They require a haven for the unchurched, something Atlanta hasn't yet constructed. It went against the tenets of his father's religion. "We don't need another church in Atlanta." More than 4,000 people visited North Point before the first year ended. The church currently serves around 43,000 people in different places. It was a separate entity and had nothing to do with Charles Stanley. The father oversaw a global corporation. The son built an enormous chapel in the country. They said nothing. Everyone remembers their altercation. It received a lot of attention in Christian media. Regardless of the reason, adultery, mental illness, envy, control issues, or something else entirely, the silence between the father and son came to represent all that was wrong with Christian leadership. Despite their inability to ignore themselves, two men taught others how to do so. In the end, they chose to go to treatment. Weekly sessions were scheduled. Honesty that hurts. How much time had passed since Andy gave up on trying to assist his father? The counselor's response was, "When your heavenly father stops believing in you." The comment hit me like a ton of bricks as soon as they started chatting again. Everything changed after that one lunch encounter. "I don't want us to end up like all those other dads and sons," the father cautioned his kid. "Me neither, Dad," Andy said in a whisper. North Point Community Church became the second largest church in the U.S. by 2013, with about 30,000 members spread across 5 locations. Even more astounding was the fact that Charles Stanley, Andy's father, who had been lonely when Andy departed, suddenly stood at the podium and praised him fervently and publicly. After humiliating Andy in his sermons, Charles was now proud to inform his audience of Andy's intentions to launch a new church and even declared it acceptable. Those were tough words to speak, Charles told himself in private, but he said them nevertheless. A sea change was the gift. They struggled to communicate for a while. But as time passed, things changed. In their respective churches, they started preaching. After initially viewing him as a renegade, the son's father started to regard him as a partner. Andy will always remember that. Having studied under one of the most renowned educators in the United States, he realized he had had a great childhood. In addition to leading the Southern Baptist Convention, Charles oversaw First Baptist Atlanta for more than 50 years. But now he was seeing his son lead a new congregation of believers. Progress slowed in Charles's last months. He was unable to move and now spent his days in a big leather chair, but his heart was burning and his mind was sharp. They developed a new pattern that helped them heal. Charles would say, "Pray for me." According to Andy, the significance of such trips was beyond words. The chair turned into a hallowed area and a representation of harmony between the two men who had been at odds for so long. Charles also ceased shouting from the platform and performing on stages. He prayed silently, however, and discovered something as potent in that chair. At one point, their dinners were silent and tense, but that wasn't always the case. The divorce of Anna, the mother of Charles and Andy, ended more than just their marriage. As father and son, it diminished their intimacy. Charles told Anna that he was worried about their relationship's future. "We've both seen what happens to dads and sons when things like this happen," he once told Andy. Because they were afraid, they had to rebuild gradually and deliberately. "I don't want that to happen to us." After almost 25 years, it all changed when he kept saying to Andy, "Andy, I could not be more proud of you." It meant more than just the fact that he did it often. Andy was supposed to know. The fact that those were Charles Stanley's remarks made them important. A word's origin must be taken into account in order to assess its meaning. Charles may have brought old ideas back to life. Although Andy had challenged accepted norms and espoused strong religious positions that angered people, Charles never publicly chastised him. He never chastised Andy for his views on the Old Testament or LGBTQ+ concerns. Repeating those 7 words repeatedly repaired something that words couldn't. Their last meeting was incredible. 3 days before his death, on Saturday night, April 15, 2023, Charles died. Andy stopped by to see us as usual. This time, though, he anticipated the routine: kneel next to the chair, say a prayer, and hear a soft, "Thank you." "Can I pray for you?" Charles asked Andy as he got up to leave. He prayed and then repeated, "Andy, I could not be more proud of you." That was the last thing his father ever said to his son. Charles Stanley died on April 18, 2023, at 7:30 a.m., at the age of 90. Andy's ministry in the church began when he was just 14 years old. Andy had no idea that this would be the last thing his father would ever say to him. In 2020, he resigned and became a priest emeritus, but his work continued on. His daughter, Becky Stanley Borson, who didn't say much in public, was there for everything, from the good times in ministry to the bad times with the family. She witnessed her father's hard work and the pain it caused him. He preached for 66 years, 50 of which he spent as pastor of First Baptist Atlanta. Her mother had filed for divorce in 1993. In Touch Ministries, which began as the Chapel Hour in 1972, became one of the most influential Christian networks ever, reaching 150 countries, being broadcast on 2,800 stations, being translated into 114 languages, and being exclusive to the United States by 2017. Although the deal wasn't finalized until 2000, Becky stayed close despite seeing her parents' relationship fall apart in front of everyone. Her name was placed next to Andy's in the epitaph, and she was there when the final chapter was written. Although Charles Stanley wrote a great deal about family values, his own family was in disarray. His wife had left, his son had been duped, and his daughter had seen firsthand the price of a worldwide ministry. Nevertheless, his lectures were preserved and are now ready for the next generation, and they were broadcast on 500 radio stations, 300 television networks, and even in remote tribal communities where computers and satellites allowed him to preach. His strong will to live allowed him to overcome the hardships of growing up with an alcoholic father who was a powerful preacher, even though he had to learn the technique of self-healing before he could teach it to others. In spite of the paradox, his case was very strong. It made it come to life.